Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following presentation is intended strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal, financial, tax, or professional psychological advice. Family law, asset division, and marital regulations vary significantly by state and jurisdiction. You should always conduct your own due diligence and consult with licensed legal representation, certified financial planners, and professional counselors before making any decisions regarding marriage, separation, or divorce. Right now in the United States, we are witnessing a massive silent demographic earthquake. The mainstream media continues to push the outdated narrative that half of all marriages are doomed to fail, a statistic born out of the cultural upheaval of the 1970s and 80s. But the actual numbers today tell a vastly different, far more complex story. As of recent data, the overall United States divorce rate has actually plummeted to its lowest point in over 50 years, hovering around 2.4 divorces per 1,000 people. On the surface, that sounds like a triumph of modern love. But when you peel back the layers, a shocking reality emerges. While younger generations are divorcing less, largely because they are waiting much longer to get married or simply opting out of the institution entirely, a completely different demographic is experiencing a catastrophic collapse in marital stability. The rate of gray divorce, which refers to couples separating after the age of 50, has skyrocketed. Today, adults over 50 account for more than 36% of all divorces in America. That rate has doubled since 1990, and for those over 65 it has tripled. We are looking at a landscape where the traditional 7-year itch has been replaced by the 30-year implosion. The stakes have never been higher. A modern divorce is no longer just a legal dissolution of a romantic partnership. It is the aggressive dismantling of a complex financial and emotional enterprise. In this comprehensive deep dive, we are going to uncover the hidden financial traps, the psychological battlegrounds, and the profound cultural shifts that are wiping out the modern American family. You are about to discover how the game of marriage and separation has secretly rewritten its rules, and why what you do not know about modern divorce law could cost you your entire life savings. Plus 2. Today we are dismantling the modern divorce journey in America from the inside out to solve a massive problem for you. The danger of navigating modern relationships completely blind to the systemic realities. For anyone currently in a relationship, contemplating marriage, or staring down the terrifying barrel of a separation, the landscape has fundamentally changed from the era of our parents and grandparents. The laws have mutated. The financial ramifications are exponentially more severe in an era of high inflation, dual income dependencies, and complex retirement asset structures. We are going to decode the exact modern divorce journey, step by step, so you can understand the historical trends, potential outcomes, and real-world case studies that define marriage in America today. By understanding the intricate socioeconomic variables and the specific phases of how marriages dissolve, you will be equipped to identify hidden risk factors long before they become unmanageable. You will understand the psychological phases of uncoupling and recognize the financial realities that could dictate the next 2 decades of your life. This is not about fear-mongering. This is about extreme preparation and radical awareness. Whether your goal is to affair-proof and divorce-proof your current marriage by understanding what actually tears couples apart, or to protect your assets and your sanity if a separation becomes inevitable, this masterclass is your ultimate blueprint. To truly understand where we are today, we must briefly look at the historical trends that paved the way for the modern American divorce machine. For the first half of the 20th century, obtaining a divorce was a grueling, adversarial, and deeply public process. It required proving fault. One spouse had to legally prove that the other committed adultery, extreme cruelty, or abandonment. This often led to fabricated stories, private investigators, and a system where the state heavily incentivized couples to stay in miserable or even dangerous situations. That entire paradigm shifted radically in 1969 when California became the first state to introduce no-fault divorce, signed into law by then-Governor Ronald Reagan. No-fault divorce meant that a couple could dissolve their union, simply based on irreconcilable differences. Neither party had to be the villain in the eyes of the law. This legal revolution swept across the country throughout the 1970s and 80s, fundamentally altering the power dynamics of marriage. It lowered the barrier to exit, leading to an immediate and massive spike in divorce rates that peaked around 1980. The stigma of divorce rapidly began to evaporate. However, this legal shift also transformed divorce from a moral judgment into a cold, calculated business transaction. The focus moved away from who was right or wrong and shifted entirely toward the division of assets, the calculation of spousal support, and the custody of children. Today, all 50 states offer some form of no-fault divorce, but the legacy of that shift is that modern marriages are held together entirely by mutual ongoing consent, rather than legal barriers. If one person decides the enterprise is over, it is over. This brings us to the precise, data-driven reality of marriage and divorce in America today. When we analyze the life cycle of modern marriages, the potential outcomes vary wildly depending on whether it is a first, second, or third attempt at the institution. Researchers estimate that roughly 41% of all first marriages will eventually end in divorce. The average duration of these first marriages before they dissolve is remarkably consistent, right around 8 years. This is the period where the initial romantic illusion fades, the brutal realities of domestic management set in, and couples either build a resilient partnership or quietly begin to build separate lives under the same roof. But the statistics become genuinely alarming when we look at remarriages. You might assume that people learn from their mistakes, go to therapy, and choose more wisely the second time around. The data strongly contradicts this assumption. Historical trends show that 60% of second marriages end in divorce, and the average duration drops to just 7 years. For third marriages, the failure rate reaches a staggering 73%. The reasons for this cascading failure rate are complex but highly predictable. Second and third marriages inherently carry significantly more baggage. Individuals are merging deeply entrenched lifestyles, navigating the massive complexities of blended families and stepchildren, and often dealing with the ongoing financial drain of alimony or child support from previous relationships. When the pressure mounts, the psychological barrier to exit is much lower. They have survived a divorce before, and they know they can survive it again. The concept of marriage as an unbreakable covenant has been entirely replaced by marriage as a conditional contract. +1. Furthermore, we must examine the stark socio-economic divide that has essentially turned marital stability into a luxury item. Divorce in America is highly correlated with educational attainment and economic status. The data reveals that individuals with a bachelor's degree or higher have a significantly lower divorce rate, roughly around 27%. In stark contrast, those with less than a high school diploma face a divorce rate hovering near 45%. This is not because wealthy or highly educated people are inherently better at loving each other. It is because they have the financial resources to outsource the primary stressors of domestic life. They can afford childcare, house cleaning, couples therapy, and separate vacations. Financial disagreements are consistently cited as a major factor in nearly 40% of all divorces. When a household is living paycheck to paycheck, every single unexpected expense, a broken transmission, a medical bill, a rent increase, becomes an existential threat to the family. This constant, grinding financial stress destroys emotional intimacy. It breeds resentment, shortens tempers, and transforms partners into adversaries fighting over scarce resources. The top reasons cited for divorce today perfectly reflect this breakdown. While lack of commitment remains the number one cited reason, closely followed by too much conflict and arguing, infidelity, and marrying too young, it is the underlying current of financial instability that often serves as the catalyst for these other issues. +2. Perhaps the most fascinating and terrifying evolution in the modern divorce journey is the unprecedented surge in gray divorce. As mentioned earlier, more than a third of all divorces now involve adults over the age of 50. This demographic phenomenon is reshaping the entire financial landscape of retirement in America. Why are couples calling it quits after 20, 30, or even 40 years of marriage? Historical trends point to a convergence of several factors. First, life expectancy has dramatically increased. A 60-year-old today can realistically look forward to another 25 years of active life. When the children finally leave the house, known as the empty nest syndrome, many couples look at each other and realize they have absolutely nothing in common anymore. Their entire relationship was built around the logistics of raising children. Without that shared project, the silence in the house becomes deafening. Secondly, women today have far more financial independence than previous generations. They have their own careers, their own retirement accounts, and they are no longer financially trapped in unfulfilling marriages out of mere survival. However, the potential outcomes of a gray divorce are often financially devastating. The wealth a couple has accumulated over 3 decades, pensions, 401k accounts, home equity, and social security benefits, must now be sliced in half. They are dividing the exact same pool of resources to fund two separate households at the exact moment their earning power is beginning to decline. Recovering from a financial halving at age 30 is completely different from trying to recover from it at age 62. There is simply not enough time left in the market for compound interest to repair the damage. Case studies of gray divorce repeatedly show individuals being forced to sell their family homes, drastically reduce their standard of living, and return to the workforce well into their 70s just to survive. +1. This is the exact landscape we are going to navigate in this series. The modern American divorce is a highly structured, fiercely adversarial system that capitalizes on emotional vulnerability. Understanding the profound cultural shifts, the harsh statistical realities, and the massive financial implications is only the first step. You cannot defend yourself against a system you do not understand. You cannot build a bulletproof marriage if you do not know the exact weapons that are currently destroying them. We have established the macro environment. We have laid out the historical context and the data-driven reality of what is actually happening in the United States today. Now we are going to dive straight into the psychology of the breakdown. In the next phase of our journey, we will explore the subtle, almost invisible red flags that signal a marriage is entering the terminal phase, long before anyone utters the word divorce. We will dissect the concept of the walkaway wife syndrome, the silent resentment buildup, and the specific communication patterns that relationship experts can use to predict relationship dissolution with extreme accuracy. The journey has just begun, and the deeper we go, the more critical this information will become to your financial and emotional survival. The biggest lie sold to the American public is that marriages end in a fiery explosion of sudden betrayal. The reality is far more insidious and vastly more common. It is a slow, agonizing erosion of connection that goes completely unnoticed until it is mathematically impossible to repair. Relationship experts call this the invisible detachment phase. In the year 2026, where our attention spans are fractured by digital demands, economic pressures, and relentless career expectations, couples are rarely blowing up overnight. Instead, they are quietly fading out. Let us look at historical trends and the current data driving this phenomenon. In the United States, women initiate nearly 70% of all divorces. For college-educated women, that number skyrockets to over 90%. This brings us to a psychological phenomenon clinically observed as the walkaway syndrome, though it applies to any partner who has silently borne the emotional labor of the relationship. The narrative told to family and friends usually goes exactly like this. A husband is completely blindsided by his wife asking for a separation, claiming everything was fine just last week. But for the initiator, the marriage actually ended 2 or 3 years before the word divorce was ever spoken out loud. Consider a real-world case study to illustrate this exact dynamic. Let us look at David and Sarah, a typical middle-class couple living in suburban Ohio in 2026. They have 2 children, a heavily financed mortgage, and a decade of shared history. David works full-time in regional logistics. Sarah manages a hybrid remote job while shouldering what sociologists define as the invisible mental load of the household. This includes tracking doctor appointments, managing social calendars, organizing childcare logistics, and constantly monitoring the emotional temperature of the home. For years, Sarah clearly communicated her profound overwhelm. She asked for couples counseling. She pointed out the growing emotional distance. She expressed that they were operating like roommates rather than romantic partners. David, interpreting the lack of screaming matches as a sign of marital stability, simply absorbed these requests as temporary complaints. He assumed that because they were not fighting, they were perfectly fine. He did nothing to fundamentally alter the system. By the time Sarah officially consults a family law attorney, she has already completely mourned the loss of the relationship. She has moved through the psychological phases of denial, anger, and bargaining entirely in isolation, while sitting right next to David on the couch. When David finally panics upon seeing the separation papers and desperately suggests intensive therapy, it is not just too late, it is actively offensive to her. The opposite of love is not hate, it is profound apathy. Once a partner reaches the stage of complete apathy, the emotional capital of the marriage is entirely bankrupt. There is no therapy in the world that can revive a patient who has been emotionally flatlining for 36 months. Imagine if you applied this exact dynamic to a critical financial investment. Imagine if you watched your primary retirement portfolio bleed 1% of its total value every single day for 3 consecutive years. You would not wait until the account balance hit absolute zero to call your financial advisor. You would panic and intervene immediately. Yet millions of Americans treat their most vital social and financial partnership with a shocking level of negligence. They ignore the daily erosion of intimacy. They dismiss the contempt creeping into their daily interactions. Contempt is the ultimate destroyer of any human connection. It is the subtle eye roll across the dinner table. It is the sarcastic remark masquerading as a harmless joke in front of friends. It is the fundamental toxic belief that your partner is somehow beneath you. When contempt firmly takes root in a household, the statistical probability of a permanent separation becomes a near certainty. Furthermore, the specific cultural environment of 2026 has radically accelerated this psychological breakdown. We are currently living in an era of hyper-individualism and algorithmic isolation. Couples are physically sitting in the same living room, but psychologically, they are inhabiting completely different universes. One partner is endlessly doom-scrolling political commentary that spikes their cortisol. The other is consumed by highly curated lifestyle content that inherently breeds deep dissatisfaction with their current reality. This constant, daily exposure to the idealized, artificially perfected lives of others creates a deeply toxic baseline for comparison. It feeds the dangerous illusion that the grass is infinitely greener, richer, and more fulfilling on the other side of a final divorce decree. When conflicts inevitably arise from this profound disconnection, they are rarely resolved through healthy dialogue. Instead, we see the massive rise of stonewalling. This occurs when one partner completely withdraws from the interaction, shutting down their emotional responses and refusing to engage whatsoever. In previous decades, a frustrated spouse might leave the house to take a drive and blow off steam. Today, they simply retreat into their noise-canceling headphones or their secondary digital screens. The psychological damage inflicted by stonewalling is severe and long-lasting. It sends a visceral biological message of total rejection to the other partner, triggering an intense stress response. Over time, this chronic stress physically rewires the nervous system, turning the marital home from a place of sanctuary into an environment of perpetual anxiety and hypervigilance. But the psychological detachment is only half the battle, and it is arguably the less dangerous half. While the emotional bond is slowly dissolving, a far more calculated process is secretly taking place in the background. Once the initiator accepts that the marriage is permanently over, they enter the tactical preparation phase. This is where the modern divorce journey transforms from an emotional tragedy into a heavily fortified, high-stakes business negotiation. They begin quietly assembling their exit strategy long before they ever serve papers. They start carefully monitoring joint bank accounts and tracking spending habits. They pull extensive credit reports to uncover any hidden debts. They make digital copies of tax returns, mortgage documents, life insurance policies, and complex investment portfolios. They are essentially conducting a covert forensic audit of their own life. The partner who is being left behind is entirely oblivious to this reconnaissance mission. They are operating under the naive assumption that they are still playing on the same team, while their spouse has already retained aggressive legal counsel and is actively plotting the complete division of the family empire. This extreme asymmetry of information is exactly what destroys people financially in modern divorces. The initiator has a massive strategic advantage. They have had years to emotionally process the grief, find peace with the decision, and take months to secure their financial positioning. The receiving partner, on the other hand, is violently thrown into sudden emotional shock, while simultaneously being forced to make the most critical, life-altering financial decisions of their entire existence. You are suddenly thrust into a highly adversarial legal labyrinth where every text message you send in anger, every emotional outburst you have, and every single dollar you spend is heavily scrutinized and potentially weaponized against you in a court of law. And this is exactly where the family court system springs its first major trap. Just when you think you can simply sit down at the kitchen table like rational adults and work things out amicably, the massive legal machinery activates without warning. You are about to discover the terrifying reality of the temporary orders hearing. This is a rapid-fire legal maneuver that dictates exactly who gets exclusive use of the house, who gets primary custody of the children, and who is legally mandated to pay the bills before a judge has even looked deeply at the actual facts of your case. If you do not understand how this initial brutal legal strike works, you can easily lose the entire war on the very first day. The temporary orders hearing, legally known in many jurisdictions as pendant light, is the most critical and least understood mechanism in the entire modern divorce infrastructure. The Latin translation literally means pending the litigation. In theory, its purpose is noble and necessary. It is designed to establish a temporary set of ground rules to prevent chaos, keep the mortgage paid, and ensure the children are cared for while the actual divorce plays out over the next 12 to 18 months. But in practice, particularly in the high-stakes environment of the year 2026, it is frequently utilized as a weapon of mass financial and psychological destruction. Here is the brutal reality of family law. Temporary orders rarely stay temporary. Judges across the country are universally overwhelmed. The family court system is severely backlogged, dealing with unprecedented caseloads. Because of this massive administrative crushing weight, whatever temporary arrangement is established in month 1 almost always becomes the permanent, finalized decree in month 18 simply because courts heavily favor maintaining the newly established status quo. If you are strategically outmaneuvered in this initial skirmish, you are facing a statistical probability of permanent defeat. Imagine if you were suddenly sued by a massive, aggressive corporation. You are served with a complex lawsuit on a random Tuesday morning, and you are coldly informed that you have exactly 14 days to prepare a flawless, comprehensive defense of your entire life. You must justify your complete financial history, prove your parenting capabilities, and defend your psychological stability. If you fail to do so, the corporation will legally seize your home, garnish up to 60% of your future wages, and heavily restrict your daily access to your children. This is not hyperbole. This is the exact timeline and potential outcome of a contested temporary orders hearing. The partner who initiated the divorce, whom we discussed in the invisible detachment phase, has spent the last year meticulously preparing their narrative. They have already interviewed and retained a seasoned litigator. They have gathered sworn affidavits from friends and family. They have strategically positioned liquid capital. The receiving partner, meanwhile, has mere weeks to emerge from paralyzing emotional shock, locate an attorney they can actually trust, hastily liquidate assets to pay an exorbitant retainer fee, and attempt to counter a fully formed legal assault. Let us look at a highly specific case study to illustrate these historical trends in action. We will examine Michael and Jessica, an upper-middle-class couple residing in suburban Texas in the year 2026. Jessica quietly initiated the separation mentally over a year ago. On a Friday evening, Michael is officially served with legal papers by a process server at his office. Embedded deep within that intimidating stack of legal documents is a notice for a temporary orders hearing scheduled just 21 days away. Jessica's legal counsel has filed an aggressive motion seeking exclusive use of their primary marital residence, temporary primary physical custody of their 2 young children, maximum temporary spousal support, and maximum temporary child support. In the courtroom 3 weeks later, the judge has approximately 20 minutes to review complex financial affidavits and hear heavily abbreviated arguments from both attorneys before making life-altering decisions. Jessica's attorney successfully argues that because Michael travels out of state 3 days a month for his senior corporate position, Jessica has historically been the primary stabilizing force for the children's daily routines. The gavel falls, and the temporary orders are legally issued. Michael is immediately ordered to vacate the marital home by Sunday evening. He is ordered to pay temporary child support based on state-mandated algorithmic guidelines, plus a substantial sum of temporary spousal support, designed to maintain Jessica's exact current standard of living. He is granted standard visitation, meaning he is legally permitted to see his children every other weekend and 1 evening a week for dinner. Now, we must closely examine the absolute mathematical chokehold of this specific scenario in the modern economy. Michael is suddenly forced to lease a suitable 2-bedroom apartment so his children have a place to sleep during his visitation weekends. In the hyperinflated rental market of 2026, this requires a massive upfront deposit. He must furnish this entire second apartment from scratch, buying new beds, linens, kitchenware, and toys. Under the temporary orders, he must also continue paying his exact historical portion of the original marital mortgage, the household utilities, the joint insurance premiums, and the newly mandated court-ordered support payments directly to Jessica. Simultaneously, he is legally responsible for continually replenishing the $25,000 retainer fee his defense attorney requires to prepare for the actual, long-term divorce trial. Within 30 days of being served, Michael is experiencing a catastrophic negative cash flow. He is rapidly burning through his personal savings because he is spending 140% of his net monthly income just to strictly comply with a temporary court order. This is a highly common, well-documented phenomenon in the modern divorce journey. The tactical goal of the initiating attorney in these specific scenarios is often a deliberate strategy of financial attrition. By securing heavily skewed temporary orders, They intentionally starve the defending spouse of the liquid capital necessary to fight the long-term legal battle. If Michael cannot afford to pay his attorney to depose hostile witnesses, hire independent forensic accountants, and prepare for a comprehensive full trial, he will be absolutely forced to accept a highly unfavorable, permanent settlement out of sheer economic exhaustion. The modern legal system inherently rewards the party who strikes first, strikes hardest, and dictates the initial financial terms. Furthermore, the psychological toll of this immediate, forced displacement cannot be overstated. We are observing individuals who are suddenly violently stripped of their daily routine, their safe sanctuary, and their core identity as an active daily parent. Historical trends and psychological data show that the first 6 months following a hostile temporary displacement carry an immense, statistically significant risk of clinical depression, severe job performance collapse, and chronic anxiety disorders. The defending spouse is forced to mentally process the profound, agonizing grief of losing their family unit, while simultaneously being required to function at absolute peak cognitive capacity to survive the ongoing legal onslaught. If they falter for even a moment, if they send a single angry, emotionally volatile text message to their estranged spouse out of sheer frustration and heartbreak, that digital footprint will be immediately screenshotted, submitted into the legal record as evidence, and ruthlessly utilized to further restrict their permanent custody access. You are legally forced to become a flawless master of emotional regulation at the exact, precise moment your entire personal world is collapsing into chaos. This initial legal strike completely dictates the battlefield, establishing the ground, but it is merely the surface layer of the conflict. Once the temporary orders establish the immediate financial bleeding and custody limitations, the true, grinding forensic warfare begins. The process drastically shifts from a high-speed sprint into an agonizing, multi-year marathon of surveillance and data extraction. We now enter the critical phase where every single transaction you have made over the last 5 to 10 years is placed under a legal microscope. You are about to enter the terrifying, highly invasive world of legal discovery. In our modern digital era, effectively hiding assets has become virtually impossible. Yet desperate people still constantly try, leaving a massive trail of digital breadcrumbs that ruthless opposing attorneys will follow to the ends of the earth. In the next critical segment of our deep dive, we are going completely underground to expose exactly how financial infidelity is systematically uncovered. We will reveal how elite forensic accountants legally rip apart cryptocurrency wallets, offshore shell companies, and hidden discretionary spending. You will learn exactly how the discovery phase will forcefully drag every single skeleton out of your digital closet, and why erasing your browser history will not save you. The formal legal discovery process is the absolute mechanism of transparency in a contested American divorce. It is the phase where the law strips away any illusion of privacy, forcing both parties to legally lay bare every single aspect of their financial, professional, and personal lives under the penalty of perjury. In the year 2026, this is no longer a matter of simply handing over a few years of paper tax returns and bank statements in a manila folder. Modern discovery has evolved into a highly sophisticated, multi-pronged data mining operation. It utilizes formal legal tools including interrogatories, which are written questions that must be answered truthfully under oath, requests for production, which legally compel the submission of physical and digital documents, and requests for admissions, designed to pin a party down on specific facts. When these standard tools face resistance, family law attorneys deploy subpoenas directly to third-party institutions, bypassing the uncooperative spouse entirely to pull records straight from employers, banks, credit card corporations, mortgage lenders, and technology platforms. To navigate this complex labyrinth, family court litigators increasingly rely on the specialized expertise of forensic accountants. A forensic accountant is essentially a financial detective whose entire job is to look past the surface numbers and reconstruct the true economic reality of a household. They analyze historical trends in a couple's lifestyle to see if their reported income matches their actual standard of living. This brings us directly to the widespread and deeply destructive reality of financial infidelity. Financial infidelity occurs when one partner actively conceals financial accounts, secret debts, major purchases, or streams of income from their spouse. In a modern high-stakes divorce, financial infidelity transitions from a marital betrayal into a major legal liability. If a spouse is caught deliberately concealing or dissipating assets during the discovery phase, the potential outcomes in family court are severe. Judges routinely penalize the hiding party by awarding a significantly larger portion of the known marital estate to the innocent spouse, and in extreme cases, ordering them to pay 100% of the opposing party's exorbitant legal and forensic fees. Let us look at a comprehensive case study from 2026 to understand exactly how this financial warfare plays out in the real world. Consider Robert and Emily, a couple living in Seattle, Washington. Robert is a highly successful software engineering director who also manages a lucrative side business consulting for tech startups. Emily has spent the last decade managing their home and raising their children full-time. When their marriage began deteriorating rapidly, Robert assumed he could easily protect his personal wealth by leveraging his superior technological literacy. He began a calculated campaign of asset diversion. He opened a private digital wallet and began funneling a portion of his consulting income into volatile cryptocurrency assets. He utilized peer-to-peer payment applications like Venmo, Cash App, and Zelle to send money to a trusted childhood friend under the guise of paying off fabricated loans, expecting his friend to hold the cash until the divorce was finalized. Furthermore, he began running personal luxury expenses through his corporate consulting business account, writing off expensive dinners, weekend trips, and tech gadgets as legitimate business write-offs to artificially depress his reported personal net income. Robert assumed that because he deleted the apps from his primary smartphone and cleared his browser history, his digital tracks were completely erased. He was profoundly mistaken. Emily's family law attorney immediately retained a forensic accountant who launched a systematic asset recovery operation. Step 1 was a meticulous line-by-line review of 5 years of joint bank statements and credit card bills. The forensic accountant was not looking for large, obvious withdrawals. They were tracking micro-patterns. They flagged a series of recurring, automated transfers of exactly $250 from Robert's primary checking account to an unfamiliar routing number. A targeted subpoena sent directly to the receiving institution revealed this was an automated funding mechanism for a secondary, unlisted brokerage account that Robert had opened at an online-only digital bank. Step 2 involved analyzing the metadata and electronic footprints. The forensic accountant subpoenaed Robert's corporate tax returns, specifically scrutinizing Schedule K-1 and Form 1099 records. They cross-referenced his reported business revenues against his personal lifestyle expenditures. When they discovered that his business checking account was routinely paying for luxury hotel stays in cities where he had no listed corporate clients, the illusion of his business write-offs completely collapsed. To uncover the hidden cryptocurrency, the forensic detective did not need to crack Robert's private keys or access his encrypted wallet directly. Instead, they subpoenaed the records of the major centralized cryptocurrency exchanges. They mapped the initial fiat currency on-ramps, linking Robert's traditional checking account to the exchange. Once they established the paper trail showing that marital funds were used to purchase digital assets, the burden of proof shifted entirely to Robert to account for every single token, or face massive sanctions from the family court judge for intentional dissipation of marital property. Imagine if you were trying to hide a massive, physical treasure chest inside a completely transparent glass house, while a team of professional searchers examined every square inch with powerful magnifying glasses. That is exactly what it is like when an individual attempts to hide assets in the modern digital age. Every single time you tap a credit card, transfer funds through an app, book a rideshare, or log into an online portal, you are leaving an indelible, permanent digital fingerprint. In a high-conflict divorce, the discovery process acts as a massive vacuum that sucks up all of this data. Attorneys will routinely demand complete access to your personal laptop hard drives, cloud storage backups, and cell phone records. Even if you physically destroy a device, the data often still exists on remote servers or within the activity logs of your service providers. This level of intense forensic scrutiny transforms the discovery phase into a psychological war of attrition. The process of gathering thousands of pages of historical documents, filling out incredibly detailed financial affidavits, and answering deeply intrusive interrogatories is exhausting, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. It is deliberately designed to wear down your psychological resolve. For many individuals, the sheer pressure of having their entire life put under a legal microscope causes them to crack. They become so desperate to make the invasive scrutiny stop that they voluntarily agree to highly disadvantageous settlement terms just to regain their privacy and escape the litigation machine. But as terrifying as the financial unmasking of the discovery phase is, it pales in comparison to the emotional devastation of what comes next. Once the assets have been thoroughly cataloged and the economic battle lines are clearly drawn, the conflict frequently shifts from the division of property to the ultimate high-stakes battleground, the children. When a couple cannot agree on how to share parenting time, The modern legal system introduces an entirely new, deeply invasive mechanism known as the custody evaluation. You are about to discover how state-appointed psychologists, guardian ad litems, and social workers will enter your home, interview your children, cross-examine your parenting style, and decide exactly how many days a month you are allowed to see your own flesh and blood. In the next critical segment of this masterclass, we will expose the dark world of modern custody battles, the rising epidemic of parental alienation, and why a single unfavorable psychological evaluation can permanently sever your relationship with your children. The moment minor children are involved, a modern American divorce ceases to be a mere financial dissolution and morphs into a high-stakes psychological war zone. In historical trends prior to the late 20th century, the maternal preference rule, often referred to as the tender years doctrine, almost automatically granted mothers full physical and legal custody of young children. Fathers were largely relegated to the role of weekend visitors and financial providers. Today, the legal standard across all 50 states has shifted to the best interest of the child. While this concept sounds incredibly equitable and progressive on paper, in the brutal reality of a contested courtroom in the year 2026, the best interest standard has inadvertently created an extremely subjective, highly weaponized environment. Because there is no strict mathematical formula for what constitutes a good parent, mothers and fathers are now forced into an adversarial arena where they must literally prove their psychological fitness, their moral character, and their emotional stability to a panel of complete strangers operating within an overburdened judicial system. When couples cannot reach a mutual parenting agreement through mediation, the court system forcefully intervenes by mandating a formal custody evaluation. This is not a casual conversation or a simple background check. It is an exhaustive, highly intrusive forensic audit of your entire personality, your personal history, and your deepest vulnerabilities. The family court judge appoints a mental health professional, often a licensed clinical psychologist or a specially trained guardian ad litem, to act as the investigative arm of the state. Imagine if a complete stranger was handed total legal authority to enter your private home, examine the contents of your refrigerator, interview your extended family members, cross-examine your children's school teachers, review your personal medical records, and then condense your entire existence as a human being and a parent into a 40-page binding legal report. That is the exact terrifying reality of the modern custody evaluation process. You are subjected to intense, multi-hour clinical interviews and a grueling battery of standardized psychological testing, most commonly the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or the Millen Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory. These tests are composed of hundreds of true or false questions designed to detect hidden pathologies. Every single answer you provide is algorithmically screened for a defensive posture, latent aggression, depressive tendencies, or personality disorders. If you show too much emotion during these interviews, you are legally deemed volatile and unstable. If you show too little emotion, you are clinically labeled as cold, detached, and lacking empathy. It is an impossible psychological tightrope walk where one single misstep, one moment of understandable frustration, can permanently cost you the physical custody of your children. Let us look at a terrifyingly common case study from the current landscape of 2026 to understand exactly how this psychological warfare is waged. Consider James and Olivia, an affluent, highly educated couple navigating a fiercely contested divorce in suburban Atlanta. Olivia, seeking to secure sole physical custody and permanently relocate with the children to a different state, recognizes that she needs a compelling reason to strip James of his parental rights. She cannot allege physical abuse because there is absolutely no evidence of it. Instead, she utilizes the highly effective modern strategy of weaponizing therapy speak. In her initial court filings and during her interviews with the court-appointed evaluator, Olivia claims James is a covert narcissist who engages in systemic gaslighting and creates a profoundly toxic and emotionally unsafe environment for the children. Because these clinical terms currently dominate our cultural discourse and social media algorithms, family court judges are terrified of ignoring them. The court takes these subjective allegations extremely seriously, immediately placing James on the defensive and shifting the entire focus of the evaluation onto his perceived psychological flaws, rather than his actual parenting history. During this lengthy evaluation process, a far more insidious and destructive dynamic begins to secretly unfold behind closed doors. This brings us directly to the devastating modern epidemic of parental alienation. Parental alienation is not simply badmouthing the other parent in a moment of anger. It is a systematic, highly calculated psychological programming of a child to reject, fear, or unconditionally hate the targeted parent without any legitimate, objective justification. It is recognized by many leading psychologists as an incredibly sophisticated and damaging form of emotional child abuse. In our case study, Olivia begins subtly and methodically altering the children's reality. When James is 15 minutes late to pick up the children for a soccer game due to severe highway traffic, Olivia does not rationally explain that he is stuck in gridlock. Instead, she sighs deeply, looks at the children with manufactured pity, and says it is so heartbreaking that your father simply does not prioritize you. When James attempts to enforce standard, healthy bedtimes and screen time limits during his weekend visitation, Olivia texts the children secretly, telling them she is so sorry he is being so rigid, controlling, and abusive, and urges them to just try to survive the weekend until they can come back to their real home. Over weeks and months, these calculated microaggressions heavily compound. Children are biologically hardwired to seek the approval and protection of their primary caregiver. Desperate to maintain the affection of the parent they spend the most time with, they slowly begin to adopt Olivia's fabricated, paranoid narrative as their own empirical truth. They learn that praising their father or enjoying their time with him triggers their mother's anxiety or withdrawal of affection. By the time the court-appointed psychologist finally sits down to interview the children in a sterile office, the psychological programming is absolute and complete. The children recite a chillingly rehearsed script. They tell the evaluator, using adult vocabulary that completely betrays their young age, that they feel deeply anxious around James, that he is emotionally abusive, and that they prefer to live exclusively with Olivia. To the untrained eye, or more commonly, to a heavily overburdened evaluator who is desperately juggling 30 active family court cases, this presents exactly like legitimate estrangement. The evaluator lacks the time and specialized training to unravel the complex web of enmeshment. The final psychological report is filed with the court, heavily favoring Olivia and completely failing to recognize the sophisticated alienation tactics at play. Based on this single document, James is subsequently stripped of his joint custody status. He is reduced to humiliating supervised visitation, effectively erased from his children's daily lives, while being legally mandated to pay maximum child support for children who have been psychologically manipulated into despising him. This is absolutely not an isolated or rare incident. Historical trends in family law indicate that allegations of emotional abuse and the subsequent deployment of alienation tactics have skyrocketed dramatically over the last decade. The sheer financial incentive heavily drives this destructive behavior. In the vast majority of jurisdictions in the United States, child support calculations are directly and mathematically tied to the specific number of overnight stays each parent is legally awarded. Therefore, aggressively reducing the other parent's visitation time is not merely a vindictive emotional victory to settle a marital score. It is a highly lucrative, long-term financial strategy. Every single night a parent is legally stripped of custody mathematically translates into an increased, tax-free monthly payment to the primary custodial parent. The modern family court system inherently monetizes the destruction of the parent-child bond, rewarding the party who can successfully marginalize the other. The potential outcomes for the children who are trapped in this psychological crossfire are nothing short of catastrophic. Longitudinal case studies and peer-reviewed psychological research reveal that children subjected to severe parental alienation suffer from astronomically higher rates of clinical depression, severe anxiety disorders, substance abuse, and massive relationship instability in their own adult lives. They are essentially forced to amputate half of their own biological identity and familial history just to survive the psychological pressure cooker of their childhood home. Meanwhile, the targeted alienated parent experiences a form of complex trauma and grief that is entirely unique and endlessly agonizing. Psychologists refer to this as a living bereavement. It is often described as worse than a physical death, because the child is still physically alive, living perhaps just 10 miles away, but they are completely unreachable, trapped behind an impenetrable wall of legal red tape, court orders, and relentless psychological brainwashing. The targeted parent is forced to financially underwrite the very household where their character is systematically assassinated on a daily basis. Fighting a flawed psychological evaluation or legally proving the existence of parental alienation, in the year 2026, requires an astronomical amount of liquid capital. It requires hiring highly specialized rebuttal experts to meticulously dismantle the original evaluator's clinical methodology. It requires deposing child psychologists, subpoenaing thousands of pages of medical and school records, and engaging in years of relentless appellate litigation. The legal burden of proof rests entirely on the targeted parent to definitively demonstrate that the children's expressed fears are manufactured and coached rather than organic. This exhaustive process can easily add $50,000 to $100,000 to the overall cost of the divorce litigation, deliberately pricing the vast majority of the American middle class completely out of access to justice. You are effectively held hostage by a judicial system that requires you to financially bankrupt yourself simply to prove you are a loving, fit parent who deserves to see your own children. You might logically think that surviving the brutal financial discovery process and the devastating psychological warfare of a custody battle means the absolute worst is finally behind you. You might assume that once the marital assets are tallied and the final parenting plan is officially stamped by a judge, you can finally begin to heal and rebuild your shattered life. But you would be drastically underestimating the sheer punitive power and the long-tail economic devastation of the final financial decree. The division of property and the assignment of children are truly just the warm-up acts for the most debilitating financial anchor of the entire modern divorce journey. In the next critical phase of our deep dive masterclass, we are going to dissect the terrifying, archaic realities of permanent spousal support. We will reveal exactly how outdated alimony laws are actively destroying the modern dual-income family, precisely how the courts calculate the future value of your labor, and the devastating, inescapable reality of being legally indentured to your ex-spouse for the rest of your natural life. Spousal support, historically known and culturally feared as alimony, represents one of the most financially transformative and legally rigid constructs in the entire American civil justice system. To understand its modern application in the year 2026, we must first trace the historical trends that birthed this legal obligation. Alimony was originally conceived in an era when women were systematically excluded from the workforce, barred from owning property, and entirely dependent on their husbands for economic survival. In that historical context, if a marriage dissolved, the husband was legally required to continue providing for his former wife, so she would not become a financial burden on the state. However, as cultural shifts opened the workforce and dual-income households became the standard baseline for the American middle class, the legal philosophy underlying spousal support had to mutate. Today, the law no longer views alimony as a permanent moral obligation, but rather as a rehabilitative tool designed to bridge the economic gap between spouses, theoretically allowing the lower-earning party to maintain a standard of living reasonably comparable to the one established during the marriage while they transition back to financial independence. But in the practical reality of modern family law, this theoretical equity often transforms into a devastating, multi-decade financial anchor. The modern legal system calculates spousal support using highly complex, state-specific guidelines that take into account a massive array of variables, including the duration of the marriage, the age and physical health of both parties, the historical earning capacity of each individual, and the specific contributions made by one spouse to the education or career advancement of the other. The duration of the marriage is often the single most critical factor determining the length of the support obligation. In many jurisdictions, marriages lasting under 10 years typically result in short-term or durational alimony, often calculated to last for half the length of the marriage. But once a couple crosses the threshold of a long-term marriage, which many states legally define as 10 to 20 years, the potential outcomes shift dramatically. In these scenarios, judges possess the wide discretionary power to award permanent spousal support, an obligation that does not possess a fixed expiration date and legally terminates only upon the death of either party or the official remarriage of the recipient. Imagine if you signed a major corporate contract where you agreed to surrender 30 to 40% of your net future labor to a business partner who no longer contributed anything to the enterprise, provided no operational value, and actively worked against your success. Imagine if this contract stated that even if your personal cost of living skyrocketed due to inflation, even if you suffered a medical setback that made working agonizing, and even if your business partner began living with a new affluent companion, you were still legally mandated to transfer those funds every single month under the explicit threat of immediate incarceration. This is exactly what navigating a modern permanent alimony order feels like for high-earning individuals across the United States. To see this exact financial machinery in action, let us look at a comprehensive real-world case study from the landscape of 2026. Consider the case of Mark and Elizabeth, a couple who finalized their divorce in Michigan after 19 years of marriage. Mark climbed the corporate ladder to become a senior operations director at a regional healthcare firm, earning an annual salary of $220,000. Elizabeth initially worked in human resources, but voluntarily stepped out of the traditional workforce 15 years ago to manage the household and raise their 3 children full-time. During the divorce proceedings, the court utilized a standardized algorithmic formula to determine the support obligation. The court determined that Mark possessed a vast, deeply entrenched earning advantage that Elizabeth could not realistically bridge in the near future due to her long absence from the corporate marketplace. The judge ordered Mark to pay Elizabeth $4,500 a month in spousal support for a duration of 9 years, alongside an additional $2,500 a month in child support for their 2 minor children. Now we must analyze the devastating, hidden financial math that modern individuals frequently overlook until it is too late. Prior to the major tax overhaul implemented by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, alimony was tax-deductible for the payer and treated as taxable income for the recipient. But for all divorces finalized after December 31, 2018, including Mark and Elizabeth's case in 2026, the federal tax code permanently inverted this rule. Today, the payer must pay full federal and state income taxes on the entire sum of spousal support before transferring it, while the recipient receives the entire amount completely tax-free. When you calculate Mark's actual take-home pay after federal withholding, state taxes, Social Security, and health insurance premiums, his net monthly cash flow is approximately $12,000. Out of that $12,000, he is legally ordered to pay $7,000 directly to Elizabeth between spousal and child support. This leaves Mark with exactly $5,000 a month to fund his own independent life, pay for his separate housing, cover his own utilities, buy groceries, and somehow save for his eventual retirement. Meanwhile, Elizabeth receives $7,000 a month completely tax-free, allowing her to maintain a significantly higher net disposable income than the individual who is actively working 50 hours a week to generate the revenue. This financial inversion creates an intense, ongoing psychological strain. Mark is trapped in a scenario where his career advancement and any future salary increases offer him virtually no personal financial relief, as the opposing counsel can legally file for a modification of support based on his increased ability to pay. Furthermore, if Mark experiences a severe economic downturn, a corporate downsizing, or a major industry shift in 2026, obtaining a legal reduction in his alimony obligation is an incredibly difficult, uphill battle. The family court does not automatically lower your support payments just because you lost your job. You must formally file a motion for modification based on a material and substantial change in circumstances. You must prove to a judge that your income reduction is completely involuntary, and that you are actively engaging in an exhaustive, documented job search. While you wait months for a court date, the original support obligation continues to accrue as a legal debt that cannot be discharged through bankruptcy. If you fall behind, the state will immediately deploy aggressive enforcement mechanisms, including the suspension of your driver's license, the revocation of your passport, the immediate seizure of your tax refunds, and the placement of a direct lien on any remaining real estate assets. This brings us to the profound cultural friction currently surrounding spousal support in America. As women increasingly out-earn their husbands in many modern professional sectors, the demographic profile of the alimony payer is rapidly shifting. Yet, the emotional resentment and legal combativeness remain entirely identical regardless of gender. The system operates on historical baselines of lifestyle maintenance that are increasingly incompatible with a volatile, unpredictable modern economy. The concept that an individual is entitled to maintain their exact marital standard of living indefinitely at the expense of another person is facing intense legal scrutiny and driving massive legislative reform movements across several states. Yet the existing case law continues to heavily penalize the primary breadwinner. The financial warfare of spousal support completely dictates your future income, but it operates in tandem with the immediate, parallel destruction of your historical wealth. While you are projecting how much of your future paycheck you will lose every month, the court is simultaneously executing a brutal forensic division of every single asset you have accumulated from the past. You are about to enter the final, definitive reckoning of the marital estate, where the single largest financial asset most Americans own, the family home, becomes an explosive device that can instantly destabilize your entire financial future. In the next part of this deep dive masterclass, we are going to expose the dark, calculated mechanics of modern asset division. We will reveal the terrifying reality of the equitable distribution myth, how a hidden legal mechanism called a qualified domestic relations order can quietly drain 50% of your retirement accounts without your consent, and the exact step-by-step process courts use to force the sale of your home in a high-interest rate market. The biggest psychological shock in any modern divorce is discovering that the legal system fundamentally redefines the word fair. When couples enter the final phase of asset division, they falsely operate under the assumption that a judge will simply draw a neat, straight line down the middle of their shared spreadsheet, splitting every single asset exactly 50-50. This is what legal scholars call the equitable distribution myth. To understand how your wealth is actually dismantled, we must examine the specific legal frameworks governing the United States in 2026. Only 9 states operate under strict community property laws, where marital assets are generally split right down the middle regardless of earning history. The vast majority of the country utilizes the equitable distribution model. In these jurisdictions, the family court judge possesses immense, sweeping discretionary power to divide assets in a manner they deem legally fair, which absolutely does not mean equal. In an equitable distribution state, a judge will scrutinize a massive array of variables to determine who gets what. They analyze the future earning capacity of each spouse, the age and health of the parties, and who will serve as the primary custodial parent. If one spouse has a significantly higher future earning trajectory, the judge can, and frequently will, award a disproportionately larger share of the current physical assets to the lower-earning spouse to theoretically level the economic playing field. This means you could actively contribute 70% of the total income to a household for 2 decades, only to walk away with 40% of the accumulated wealth. But the danger of equitable distribution goes far beyond mere percentages. The true financial devastation lies in the liquidity and the tax basis of the assets being divided. Let us look at a highly specific scenario regarding the family home, which currently represents the absolute most dangerous financial trap in the 2026 divorce landscape. We are operating in a macroeconomic environment heavily defined by the lock-in effect. Millions of American couples secured 30-year fixed-rate mortgages in the years surrounding 2020 and 2021, locking in historically low interest rates hovering around 2.8 to 3%. Today, in 2026, the national average for a 30-year fixed mortgage aggressively fluctuates above 6.2%. Plus one. When a couple divorces, the family home must be dealt with. The historical, idealized solution was for one spouse to simply buy out the other spouse's equity and keep the house for the stability of the children. However, to execute a buyout in modern family law, the retaining spouse must completely remove the exiting spouse's name from the mortgage to release them from the massive liability of the debt. The only legal way to achieve this is through a total mortgage refinance. If a spouse attempts to refinance a $500,000 mortgage in 2026 to buy out their partner, they are forced to surrender their 3% interest rate and adopt the current 6.2% rate. This mathematical reality instantly doubles their monthly housing payment, transforming a historically affordable family home into a crushing financial liability. In the vast majority of modern cases, neither spouse possesses the standalone liquid income to qualify for this new, hyperinflated mortgage payment on a single salary. Because a buyout is mathematically impossible for the average middle-class family, the court inevitably steps in and issues a forced sale order. The judge mandates that the marital residence must be listed on the open market, sold to the highest bidder, and the remaining equity divided between the parties. This triggers a catastrophic wealth destruction event. First, you lose approximately 6 to 8% of the total home value immediately to real estate agent commissions, staging costs, and closing fees. Then, the newly divorced individuals are thrust into the brutal 2026 housing market as desperate buyers. They are taking their fraction of the remaining home equity and attempting to purchase 2 separate, smaller homes, while borrowing money at interest rates that are more than double what they previously paid. They are simultaneously downsizing their standard of living, while exponentially increasing their monthly debt obligations. The family home, once the absolute bedrock of their long-term financial security and generational wealth, is violently liquidated to feed the transactional costs of the divorce machine. While the destruction of the real estate portfolio is highly visible, a far more silent and complex extraction occurs within your long-term retirement accounts. Many high-earning individuals falsely believe their 401k, their traditional IRA, or their vested corporate pension is strictly their own protected property simply because their name is the only one listed on the account statement. In family law, this is completely irrelevant. Any retirement contributions made, and any exponential market growth that occurred from the date of the marriage to the date of the legal separation, is legally classified as joint marital property subject to aggressive division. However, you cannot simply log into your brokerage account and transfer half of your 401k to your ex-spouse. Doing so would trigger massive, immediate early withdrawal penalties from the Internal Revenue Service, alongside a catastrophic income tax bill that could wipe out 30% of the total value overnight. To bypass this penalty, the court utilizes a highly specialized, fiercely complex legal instrument known as a Qualified Domestic Relations Order, universally referred to as a QDRO. A QDRO is a distinct legal decree, completely separate from your final divorce judgment, that directly orders your retirement plan administrator to carve out a specific percentage or fixed dollar amount of your pension or 401k and permanently reassign it to your former spouse, who is legally designated as the alternate payee. The exact step-by-step process of executing a QDRO is a bureaucratic nightmare that frequently takes months or even years to finalize. Your family law attorney typically must hire a specialized QDRO drafting firm, because a single misplaced legal phrase or an incorrect federal tax code citation will cause the corporate plan administrator to outright reject the document. Once the QDRO is finally approved and executed, the funds are electronically segregated. For the spouse losing the retirement assets, the mathematical consequences are staggering. Let us assume you are 45 years old, and you have diligently accumulated $500,000 in a tax-advantaged retirement account. A QDRO forcefully removes $250,000 of that capital. You are not just losing the raw cash value. You are losing 2 decades of future untaxed compound interest on that specific principal. If that $250,000 had remained in the market, historically doubling every 7 to 10 years, it would have generated millions of dollars in wealth by the time you reach the age of 65. A QDRO effectively amputates your financial timeline, forcing you to essentially restart your entire retirement savings strategy from scratch at the exact chronological moment you have the least amount of time left in the market to recover. Furthermore, the allocation of these complex assets is where the equitable distribution myth does its worst damage. An aggressive opposing counsel will frequently attempt to trade highly liquid, tax-free assets, such as the cash proceeds from the forced sale of the house, in exchange for letting you keep the entirety of your pre-tax retirement accounts. On a surface-level spreadsheet, giving your spouse $100,000 in tax-free cash while you keep $100,000 in a traditional 401k looks like an equal 50-50 split. But it is a massive, carefully disguised financial trap. When you eventually withdraw that retirement money in the future, you will be heavily taxed on every single dollar at your ordinary income rate, meaning your actual net value is significantly lower than the tax-free cash your spouse walked away with. If you do not possess a forensic accountant carefully calculating the future tax basis of every single asset being negotiated, you will be systematically outmaneuvered and robbed blind in plain sight. For W-2 wage earners and standard corporate employees, the devastation of forced home sales and QDROs is often the absolute rock bottom of the financial journey. However, if you are an entrepreneur, a startup founder, or a small business owner, the nightmare has not even begun. The moment a business entity is introduced into a marital estate, the divorce transcends personal finance and transforms into a hostile corporate takeover. In the next phase of this deep dive, we are going to expose the terrifying reality of business valuation in family court. We will reveal exactly how forensic experts pierce the corporate veil to expose your operating accounts, how the concept of personal goodwill is weaponized to artificially inflate the value of your enterprise, and how a judge can legally force you to liquidate your life's work to pay off your ex-spouse. Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following presentation is intended strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal, financial, tax, or professional corporate advice. Business valuation laws, goodwill classifications, and asset division regulations vary significantly by state and jurisdiction. You should always conduct your own due diligence and consult with licensed legal representation, certified forensic accountants, and specialized business appraisers before making any decisions regarding the division of business entities in a marital separation. For entrepreneurs, founders, and small business owners, the standard financial devastation of a modern divorce is merely a prelude to a much larger, infinitely more complex corporate nightmare. There is a pervasive, highly dangerous misconception in the American business community that operating under a limited liability company, an S corporation, or holding a specialized professional license automatically insulates your life's work from family court. This is fundamentally false. In the year 2026, the moment your marital dissolution involves a privately held business entity, the litigation transcends personal finance and rapidly transforms into a hostile corporate takeover. The family court judge is no longer just looking at your personal checking account. They are effectively assuming the role of a hyper-aggressive corporate auditor, with the ultimate legal authority to dissect your balance sheets, assess your market value, and forcefully redistribute your equity. The first mechanism deployed by opposing counsel in this corporate battlefield is a legal maneuver known as piercing the corporate veil. In a healthy, functioning business, the corporate entity is legally distinct from the personal finances of the owner. But in a contested divorce, forensic accountants are hired to deliberately blur that line. They will forensically examine every single transaction running through your business, operating accounts to identify discretionary spending or commingled funds. If you have ever run a personal car leased through the business, paid for a family vacation using corporate rewards points, or employed a spouse for administrative duties, the opposing legal team will utilize these transactions to argue that the business is simply an alter ego of your personal finances. Once the court accepts this narrative, the protective shell of your corporate structure evaporates, and the entire gross revenue of the enterprise is thrown directly into the marital estate for aggressive division. However, extracting cash from the operating account is just the preliminary skirmish. The true, high-stakes warfare centers entirely around the official valuation of the business itself. You cannot physically split a functioning plumbing company, a dental practice, or a boutique software agency in half without completely destroying its operational capacity. Therefore, the court must assign a specific, legally binding dollar amount to the enterprise, so that the non-business owning spouse can be bought out of their equitable share. To establish this number, courts rely on three primary valuation methodologies: the asset approach, the market approach, and the income approach. The asset approach simply tallies up the physical inventory and equipment, which rarely reflects a company's true worth. The market approach attempts to compare your business to similar recent acquisitions in your specific industry. But in the modern service economy of 2026, the most frequently utilized and heavily contested method is the income approach, which attempts to calculate the present value of all the future cash flow your business is expected to generate. This brings us to the absolute epicenter of modern divorce litigation for business owners: the concept of goodwill. In a business valuation context, goodwill is the catch-all term for the intangible value of an enterprise that exceeds its hard, physical assets. It is the brand reputation, the established systems, and the customer loyalty. But family law draws a massive critical distinction between two specific types of goodwill: enterprise goodwill and personal goodwill. Enterprise goodwill belongs exclusively to the business entity itself. It includes your trademarks, your physical location, your proprietary software, and your recurring revenue contracts. It is value that can be easily transferred to a hypothetical new buyer. Because it is an asset of the business, enterprise goodwill is heavily classified as marital property subject to division. Plus 2. Personal goodwill, on the other hand, is inextricably linked directly to the individual owner. It is your specific industry expertise, your unique personal relationships with key clients, your individual reputation, and your specialized skills. Personal goodwill cannot be sold or transferred, because if you leave the company, that specific value immediately vanishes. In many jurisdictions, personal goodwill is legally classified as your own future earning capacity, and therefore, it is strictly excluded from the divisible marital estate. The financial stakes of this single classification are astronomical. If opposing counsel can successfully argue that your business possesses massive enterprise goodwill, they artificially inflate the marital asset pool by millions of dollars, entitling your ex-spouse to a massive, life-altering payout. If your defense attorney can successfully prove that the value is entirely personal goodwill, that exact same value is shielded from division. Plus 1. Let us look at a highly illustrative case study to understand the terrifying mechanics of this valuation war. Consider the case of Marcus, a successful cybersecurity consultant operating in Austin, Texas, in 2026. Marcus built his boutique consulting firm from the ground up during his 12-year marriage. The business generates approximately $2 million a year in gross revenue. During the divorce, his wife's forensic accountant utilizes the income approach and values the entire business at roughly $5 million, aggressively arguing that the firm's client list and ongoing retainer contracts represent pure, transferable enterprise goodwill. Under this valuation, Marcus would legally owe his ex-spouse $2.5 million in liquid cash just to retain ownership of his own company. Marcus's defense team must immediately counter this catastrophic assessment by proving the existence of personal goodwill. They deploy a sophisticated valuation technique known as the with and without method. This forensic model meticulously calculates the value of the firm with Marcus actively working, and then simulates the exact value of the firm if Marcus were to suddenly disappear tomorrow. Because Marcus is the primary rainmaker, the sole technical architect of their security protocols, and the only reason high-level clients trust the firm, the without simulation reveals that revenues would instantly collapse by 80% if he left. By utilizing this data, his expert witness successfully argues that $4 million of the $5 million valuation is actually pure personal goodwill. The court accepts this analysis, drastically reducing the divisible marital value of the business to just $1 million, entirely saving Marcus from corporate bankruptcy. But what happens when the court rules against the business owner? Or when the business genuinely possesses massive enterprise value? This is where the legal system delivers its final crushing blow. If a judge legally determines that your business is worth $4 million and your spouse is entitled to $2 million of that equity, the court does not care that your wealth is entirely illiquid. You are legally ordered to execute a massive structured buyout within a heavily compressed time frame. To comply with this order without completely liquidating the business, founders are frequently forced to take on extreme levels of high-interest corporate debt, leverage their accounts receivable, or surrender massive amounts of equity to private equity firms just to generate the cash necessary to pay off their ex-spouse. You are effectively forced to mortgage the entire future of your company, devastating your profit margins and halting all future growth and expansion, simply to survive the divorce decree. You have now seen the brutal mathematical realities of asset division, from the forced sale of the family home to the corporate dismantling of privately held businesses. But the modern divorce journey does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in the public square. As the financial and legal warfare rages behind closed doors, a completely different, highly toxic battle is simultaneously being waged in the digital realm. In the year 2026, your social media presence, your digital footprint, and your public reputation are actively weaponized to destroy your character, manipulate the court's perception, and alienate your community. In the next phase of this deep dive, we are going to expose the terrifying reality of the modern public relations war in divorce. We will dissect how digital smear campaigns are carefully orchestrated, how seemingly innocent social media posts are legally twisted into evidence of psychological instability, and exactly how the court of public opinion can permanently destroy your career long before a judge ever signs the final decree. The weaponization of the public square in a modern American divorce is an entirely digital phenomenon that transforms a private family matter into a highly coordinated public relations campaign. In the year 2026, the traditional legal advice to simply remain silent and let your attorney handle the talking has become completely obsolete. We are living in a hyper-connected society where information is instantly crowdsourced, virally distributed, and permanently archived. Because of this, the battle for the narrative